illegal immigration destroys a nation. It eats away at it from within. It might be disguised as an act of compassion for the downtrodden, but ultimately, allowing for illegal immigration to take place is akin to eagerly and knowingly inviting in the Trojan horse. Here's an uncomfortable truth. If you import the third world, you will become the third world. In this video, I'd like to walk you through the devastating effects illegal immigration has had on the Western world, and why deportations are not only justified, but necessary. Nationalism is not fascism. A desire to maintain the identity and values of one's nation is legitimate, and it should never have been demonized in the way that it has. We are on the precipice of either saving our countries or letting them crumble into oblivion. It's time we got clear on the silent war that has been waging against the Western world. And it's time we got clear on the Western values that we are fighting for. When illegal immigration is allowed to take place, the following things occur. The economy is destroyed, the working and middle class slip into poverty, the wealth gap increases, citizens are stripped of their rights, crime rates skyrocket, and the culture and the landscape deteriorate. Any second-rate economist who says otherwise is either lying to you or lying to themselves. Let's take a look at the first three. When a nation is flooded with illegal immigrants, the first people who get hit are the working class. By opening its borders indiscriminately, it allows itself to be invaded by illegal immigrants who are willing to work for slave wages, which necessarily hurts the working class. This is a simple matter of supply and demand. The higher the supply of workers relative to the amount of available jobs, the lower wages will be. Full stop. Not only that, but illegal immigrants come from impoverished countries, which means their willingness to work for less is itself at a much lower starting point. Thus, hardworking Americans are either let go in favor of this cheaper labor, or they find their paycheck progressively shrinking over time. Pair that with the increasing rates of inflation, and you have a recipe for disaster. To compound the problem, this directly leads to an increase in the wealth gap. Democrats like to complain about the greedy high-tech moguls and the heartlessness of capitalism. But really, it's their foolish policies that have obliterated the working and middle classes that have been the backbone of the American enterprise. By bringing in cheap labor, they robbed the working and middle class of their livelihood. And they increased their businesses' margins by importing illegal immigrants who, in terms of wages, are akin to slaves. And I want to emphasize this. Make no mistake, they have imported slaves. Thus, the working and middle class have been reduced to peasantry, with the elites as the new aristocracy. Victor Davis Hanson, a war historian from the Hoover Institute, wrote about this phenomenon in his book, The Dying Citizen. Drive on El Camino Real on the perimeter of Stanford University's elite campus and witness hundreds living in curbside trailers in the manner of the poor of Cairo, or visit the side streets near the Google headquarters in nearby Mountain View, where thousands live in their cars, or walk among the homeless on University Avenue in Palo Alto. Then juxtapose their lifestyles with estates in nearby Woodside, Atherton, or Portola Valley, and the Mercedes-Benzes and BMWs of those in their earlier 20s parked in the student lots at Stanford University. The natural historical referent for this dichotomy is certainly not the booming middle classes emerging following World War II. Instead, the image is one of the manors and keeps of medieval Europe amid peasant huts outside the walls. Another consequence of illegal immigration is the unrestrained rise in crime. When unvetted illegal immigration is allowed and even encouraged, you will necessarily have a disproportionate amount of criminals crossing the border. For one, coming to America offers them a whole buffet of opportunities for their criminal enterprise. And what's more, they know they can get away with it. Their crimes were met with laughable laxity and virtually no repercussions, all in the name of tolerance and anti-racism. If they're able to get away with severe crimes such as murder, robbery, and assault, why wouldn't these criminals come running in? With policies like catch and release, these illegal immigrants rightly feel almost untouchable. Now, what some might not want to admit is that all cultures are not alike. Borders are what keep good ideas in and bad ideas out. The level of poverty and crime in the third world are not only the consequences of bad governments, but also of bad values. Some cultures don't believe in law and order. They solve problems through violence. Some cultures don't believe in meritocracy, so their institutions become contaminated with corruption and nepotism. And it is exactly the culture of these nations that keep them in a perpetual state of poverty and chaos. No, not Western colonialism, oppression, or the lack of foreign aid. And this is the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about. If you import these values, they will shape your society and eat away at it from within. This is not about racism. It's about a fundamental clash of values. Those that have allowed the Western world to thrive, innovate, and prosper, and those that have kept the third world trapped in centuries of violent tribalism and stagnation. So it bears repeating once again. If you import third world values, you will get a third world country. On top of this, we have the erosion of what it means to be an American citizen. If illegal immigrants receive preferential treatment, such as healthcare and free housing, what good is it to be a citizen? In his book, The Dying Citizen, Victor Davis Hanson writes the following. Once state assistance was allowed for non-citizens, the rate of naturalization fell, apparently because residents saw few further advantages in becoming citizens once state support was guaranteed. We have lived in an age where American taxpayer dollars were being funneled into resources for illegals, while US citizens who are in need, even veterans, get no support whatsoever. A final quirk in the illegal immigration debate. If open border advocates could not ensure amnesty and citizenship for illegals, then the value of citizenship could be diminished altogether. A sort of compromise citizenship could be reformulated in which non-citizens would gain what citizens lost. As the more entitlement services were stressed, the less citizens could expect prior levels of service. The more non-English immigrants sometimes overwhelmed schools and public services, the fewer resources would be available to citizens. And the more there were calls for fewer requirements for legal identification for voting, the more citizens doubted the value of their own ballots. Thus, citizenship itself becomes meaningless. The next problem we have that is unique to our times is the idea of multiculturalism over multiracialism. American multiracialism, which envisions one inclusive and common culture of many races, wars with the very different idea of multiculturalism, which seeks to define the country by many, often adversarial cultures. Clearly, diversity is not our strength. Unity under the American Constitution is our strength. Assimilation was once a prerequisite for immigration. In 1919, Theodore Roosevelt wrote the following. In the first place, we should insist that if the immigrant who comes here in good faith becomes an American and assimilates himself to us, he shall be treated on an exact equality with everyone else, for it is an outrage to discriminate against any such man because of creed or birthplace or origin. But this is predicated upon the person's becoming, in every facet, an American, and nothing but an American. Today, in the name of diversity, assimilation is no longer expected, and even frowned upon. One of the arguments that Democrats use to justify illegal immigration is the famous line, "America is a land founded by immigrants." But the immigrants they speak of assimilated. The immigrant was to adopt English as his primary spoken language, as well as the responsibilities that accompanied the gift of citizenship. He accepted the Constitution, both in fact and spirit. In lieu of blood and soil, it was to be his unifying, guiding political doctrine. The only kind of immigration that works is that of vetted people who are chasing the American dream and are readily willing to contribute to it. They embrace the American culture and become loyal to this land. The reason people want to immigrate to America is because they believe in the greatness of America. But today, you have Americans themselves insulting the legacy of our nation and grinding its identity to a pulp. Western values are themselves denigrated with a slew of anti-Western, pro-diversity rhetoric. Ultimately, when multiculturalism is celebrated and diversity becomes dogma, the nation devolves into tribalism. Once a man owes more loyalty to his first cousin than to a fellow citizen, a constitutional republic cannot exist. Its unifying culture inevitably crumbles from within. And in the famous words of Thomas Hobbes, what results is the war of all against all. But how did all of this happen under our very noses? For one, illegal immigration was painted as something innocent and compassionate. Anyone who opposed it was labeled as heartless and racist. They only want a better life for themselves and their families, so who are we to stop them? And slowly but surely, the language around illegal immigrants began to change. In Orwellian fashion, language continues to be reinvented to reflect the political massaging of illegal immigration. The key to understanding the entire immigration controversy is to remember the sustained attempt to remove the critical adjective illegal from any of the many nouns that follow. So over the past 20 years, illegal aliens became illegal immigrants because alien means foreigner in Latin, which was all too exclusionary after all. The illegal was then dropped and the term turned into undocumented immigrants. All of this was done to obfuscate the fact that crossing the border illegally was itself a crime. So with all of that said, why do I think deportations are necessary? Because a nation has a right to maintain its identity. Nationalism is not only okay, but it is good. It's what binds people together under a shared identity, narrative, and history. But more importantly, only through a sense of nationalism and belonging can you maintain a high trust society. The late Sir Roger Scruton, a favorite conservative philosopher of mine, put it like this: the nation state, as we now conceive it, is the byproduct of human neighborliness, shaped by an invisible hand from the countless agreements between people who speak the same language and live side by side. It results from compromises established after many conflicts and expresses the slowly forming agreement among neighbors both to grant each other space and to protect that space as common territory. Only under nationalism is that neighborliness and mutual responsibility achieved. No matter how hard the liberals in America and Europe try, globalism doesn't and never will work. Wherever it was tried, you would see a high-trust society devolve into a low-trust society. A country that doesn't enforce its own borders is not a country at all. I will leave you with these words by Victor Davis Hanson. America, then, is only as good as the citizens of any era who choose to preserve and to nourish it for one more generation. Republics are so often lost, not over centuries, but within a single decade.